Hi, everybody. It's Dean West, President of Association Laboratory. And believe it or not, we are 25 years old this year. And to celebrate, we're doing a series of interviews with some of our more accomplished friends. And in this case, Paul Bishop, one of my longest term friends, about the future of association leadership. Paul is CEO of the Water Professionals International, which I almost always get wrong because they changed their name. But he and I have known each other for more than 30 years. He's an outstanding CEO and a better person. Paul, why don't you introduce yourself real quick?
Well, I don't know if I'm worthy of that introduction, but as Dean said, Paul Bishop, President and CEO of Water Professionals International. We're based here in Des Moines, Iowa, actually Dean's home state. So he has that over me. Prior to that, I've worked in various industries. I was a CEO for local chapter of juvenile diabetes. And then prior to that, had association work. That's actually where I met Dean. So I've been in the medical, public health, and actually lobbying field for the better part of my 30-year career. And then I've been with WPI for the last 16 and a half. Hard to believe.
And done a phenomenal job. Paul and I have a fun kind of introductory story. We met each other at an American Medical Association junket when we were in our young 20s, when a slightly older Dean West and another friend taught Paul how to use his expense account with the MIDI bar. That was one of the more, was a different age of association leadership back then, wasn't it, Paul?
It was. I had, yes. And what was even more interesting was when I had to go back and explain all my expenses to my boss.
Successfully, though, right? Successfully.
Yes, very much so.
There you go.
You taught me well. And
it's pronounced mentorship.
Yes.
But that's a good segue, Paul. When I've known each other for, almost 30 years now, basically 30 years, more than 30 years. We've worked together, and you think of the changes from our young 20s when we began into our young 30s, young 40s, et cetera. When you start, kind of projecting forward another 10, 15 years, what do you think the most substantial differences are going to be in association leadership?
That I will tell you, that's a really good question and a hard one. I think I will share with you what I'm learning. I'm actually learning from my youngins, as I call them, my 30 somethings and younger. I think is honestly, it's a phrase too often used, but it is that balance. I think that is what I'm seeing most. Again, don't get me wrong. I think the way my old school approach, we work hard, but I do think there's something to be said for the way they look at things, and they truly try to balance and find time outside of their work. Their identity is much more about what's outside of the office than what's in. And I think for us and our generation, honestly, sometimes our job is our identity, or we've incorporated it into who we are, and it's very much. And so I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. But I do think it'll be interesting, because I think it'll mean that people will maybe move jobs more often. They may, things will be different within the office setting. But truly, I think what I'm seeing is less identity profiling, if that makes sense. My wife.
In essence, they're going to identify less with the organization, with the association's members,
and more. The job is a means to an end, and I think for us, it has been for so long, for those of us probably in our 50s or early 60s. It's that. Wow, this is my this is my legacy, this is my thing. And I do think as the younger generations come along, they see that they appreciate our generation to some extent, but I think they also see, hey, time. I want more time. I want time as that commodity that people are hurting. And I will share, Dean. I had last year at our conference, we had this panel of people who retired, and they're state government agency people. But the one thing one said, and it just stuck out to me, goes, when asked by one of the people in the audience, one of the youngins in the audience, what would you do differently? They said, I probably wouldn't have spent the 10, 20 hours a week, extra hours a week in the office. And that's what he said, and dropped it. But the room went silent. And I think it was a takeaway. He goes, I don't know if it made a difference. And he followed up with, I don't know if it made a difference. And something to be said for that. So I think, that old thing of working smarter, not harder, valuing your time. Yeah,
Let
I
me,
think
let
those.
me, this isn't a challenge to that. But it's a different direction. I'm curious about this. So, one is I absolutely know an extra 10 hours a week in my office won't do anybody any good. So I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Mhm.
But I've watched my friends and colleagues over the years who kind of adopt these professions and adopt these industries, and they care deeply about the members. They keep dearly about the members' success. They build these personal relationships. I've seen you do it
Mhm.
at your own organization, but you'll talk to those same people, and you're two boards away from getting fired because two or three people come on and say, you know what, whatever you did isn't good enough, or you didn't do it for us. And so it's really hard to be loyal to an organization that a couple of different board members and all of a sudden you're out the door. So do you think something like that is impacting people's perception of the work, or is that a completely separate issue? What are your thoughts on that?
I will tell you, Dean, that analogy couldn't be more poignant. I literally just had a colleague in the last week because of change in board leadership. She was let go a week ago,
Yeah.
and but spent 4 to 5 months really struggling with board, board interaction and board leadership, and so, and now working out an exit strategy, and that's all because of change in board. And I think you're spot on. I do. That is something I think a lot of us should be leery of. I do think in this time, the relationships that we built way back when, especially like as you said, when we would know doctors, or you would, and doctors would want you to visit their office or play golf
Sure.
or whatever.
Yeah.
You're right. We have personal relationships. Even 10, 15 years ago in this job, I built relationships quickly. Now, as the industry is changing, as our members move, I think you're right. I'm going to have new board members that I don't have a strong personal relationship with,
Yeah.
and or professional. I do a lot of the things that ASA talks about and best practices, but you're right. I think that board leadership change is huge. I think boards. I think if you're a good CEO, you have boards that are strategic and thinking, and maybe, I hate to say it, maybe they know something that as a CEO I didn't, and
Yeah.
you hate to think that, but at the same time, I think that is also why I think as a CEO you're always, you know, you're never more than, as you say, a year or two away, or never more than a box away of having to box your
Yeah.
stuff up and go.
I
And
still remember a friend of mine. He retired, and I asked him. Actually, there's two quick stories. One, I asked, you're tired. I'm like, why'd you retire and all this kind of stuff. And he goes, and he was probably 65, late 60s, so he's ready to retire anyway. But he goes, I've been CEO for 30 years. I built a building in DC for this group. I built a building in Rosemont for this group, and I had some 30-year-old vet come onto my board and ask me what I'd done recently, and he just hadn't just said now. So that'll lead to my more saltier story, which is a very successful exec in healthcare, resigned, or not resigned, like he just quit. He didn't retire, he just quit, and he'd had like 100%, 700% growth. We'd actually profiled him as a case study on growth, and I was honestly curious. I'm clearly not gonna name his name. I'm like, why did you leave? I mean, it looked like everything was going well. And he goes, Dean, I was 1 year away from telling my board to fuck off. And you could just tell he had this sense of every new person who showed up immediately criticized him, immediately questioned what had been done and why it was being done. So you've been a long-term CEO, and I've worked with you over the years, about 16 years at WBI. How do you navigate those changes as a leader moving forward? Do it both personally to avoid that kind of mentality, but B, to adapt to the new crucible that keeps getting created.
I think, one of those stories are sad. I, but you hear it, and I will share. I even hear that story. I mean, I kind of a little bit, am I with my wife as a teacher, leaving the
Yeah.
classroom, and going into more of a specialty in her teaching because of changes. I think for me, the way I've navigated it is honestly, I am learning, but it is to listen to my board. I got some pushback last year on during my evaluation about the CEO dashboard, and I didn't even realize they were actually looking at it.
Yeah,
And
that was the
you
first
know,
good news. Oh my God, you read it. Like
well, you kind of, you laugh, but you're like, so we were kind of hit and miss with it. Well, no, then I find out from my board that are actually listening. And so, that was, so to me, I think, Dean, if you're really is sometimes paying attention, it was a small thing in my review,
yeah,
but it was one of the big things in the sense of, okay, wow, they want that. They want that because we only meet a couple times a year. They want that to feel engaged. So we have been doing it every other month, not every month, but every other month. I might do a video introduction. We change it up.
sure.
We do short stories. But I think, so to your point, what I think we are trying to do is not only, as they say, with your membership, trying to keep, they always talk, ACA best practice, keep what you're doing in front of your membership. Honestly, to your friend's board, to the friend of the story, what have you done lately? I think part of what you need to do as CEO is never think you've been here 16 years.
No, that's good statement. Yeah, that's great. Great
I'm
way of
year
saying
2 or 3, and I think
Yeah.
that's honestly, it's staying that way. And I think having a younger team has actually helped me stay that way. And we have a mantra in our office, or a poster in our office. I highly recommend this website, demotivation.com. It's got best posters, but we have one of a running with the bulls tradition, and it's got that picture guy about to get gored, and it says tradition.
Yeah.
Just because that's the way we've always done it, doesn't mean it isn't incredibly stupid. I
Yeah.
don't want to be the boss who says that's the way we've always done it. And so I've always been very careful about that. And I think,
Yeah.
I think that's what you have to do. I think as a CEO, like your organization, you have to change and be adaptable, and it's easy to rest on our laurels, after 5, 10, 15 years and say this. But honestly, I'm kind of at this point, I battle between sometimes as a CEO, okay, staying the course, but also going, we need to shake things up,
Yeah.
because staying the course, I think, can get you, in trouble. I think if you're not constantly looking at, especially in association, how you can adapt, you're gonna get left aside. Or
Yeah.
the worst part, I think, about your friend who quit was, then you become resentful. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Angry about it. Sure.
And that's not good for you or for them. And I think actually by leaving, you did yourself a favor. And I think, like the story of my friend last week, she will land something better. She'd been there 8 years. She will end up being better. We'll see how that association ends up, because it was kind of one of those decisions they
Sure.
rushed into. But I think they will do well. They've got good leadership on their board. But I mean, that's where I think for us, through the nominating process and those types of things as a CEO, I think it's trying to find good people on your board who will challenge you, who recognize change is needed, but also, I don't, not but and also I think really, I don't know. I like people who challenge me to think differently,
Yeah.
and that has, I think, aided me. It has frustrated me sometimes, I'll shower, but
Yeah.
that was the thing that came out of last year was, wow, they are looking at this. And it's actually, I've turned the CEO
Yeah. It's
dashboard.
hard to be angry when they look at what you show them.
Yeah, yeah, and you got to be like, and they're liking it. So
Yeah.
and I think it is listening. Sometimes, again, Dean, I think, as a CEO, sometimes we worry about the big things, but it's those little comments. It's the little stories. It's the that really shape the way you lead.
Yeah.
And I think in this office, that is one thing I've always tried to do. That I have a small staff of 8. So I am literally chief cook and bottle washer. I will clean the sink. At one point, I came after a week of being gone. I came into the office on the weekend. Sink was dirty. I sent a text to the team saying, "Hey, I don't mind doing the dishes when they're mine." but I mean, it was a little thing, but it was one of those funny things where I, I will. We all do the dishes. We do stuff around here. It's no one is above. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of the mentality I've had that's helped.
One thing just listening to you, Paul, I get the sense, it's like you almost want to treat your job as a CEO as being an athlete with seasons. And here's what I think of that, which is, okay, I've had this great season, and now I'm going to have an off season, but next season I get tackled again. I still have to make layups. I still have to perform, regardless of who the defense is, regardless of what league I'm in, regardless of who my teammates are. And so a lot of what athletes do, professional athletes, when we were talking about your son earlier, is they prepare themselves to adapt to their changing teammates, prepare themselves to a different general manager, prepare themselves for different rules. And it's about being physically and mentally prepared to adapt to that change, as opposed to, since I was a good running back last year, I'll be a good running back next year. Like, you never give up that professional development. You never give up that preparation. Does that make sense, or is that taking it too far?
Actually, Dean, that's I have to tell, that's one of the better analogy metaphor I've heard, honestly. And you're right. And as we mentioned braggadociously, my son's going to swim at TCU next year. But you're right. He never rests. He had a great season this year as a senior in high school. They won state, but he is back in the pool the next week swimming, because he can't rest. And Dean, that is probably one of the better analogies, I think, because I really do like that. As you're right, we had a great year last year, but what are we going to do this year? And and having a son who's a swimmer, even more so than, say, basketball or football, and with respect to those sports, those players they take time off, they take seasons. Swimmers, they maybe take a month off a year, but really they don't. They are constant 5-6 days a week, all year long, minus a break or two. They really don't. And that's the kind of thing as a CEO. But I also think that shows that you do need some time in there to take a break and take some mental health. But you're right. We're constantly having to evolve as an athlete. I think that's a very good. Yeah.
Well, that's why I get paid the moderate bucks.
I know. You do a great job.
For listeners, that whole story is trademark Association Laboratories. Don't even try and use it. But we'll leave that in. Paul, I kind of leave. Go ahead. But
to follow up on that, the other thing about that, but being a trainer, and you said this, or being an athlete means training. Being a CEO, you made this point, but it cannot be. I think it needs to be emphasized: professional development. What separates us as association from good to bad is we do invest in professional development. Every one of my team members, myself,
we do too.
And I've hired you. Professional development to me is key, and we even do that for our board. That does help. I do the ASAE board, exceptional boards. I bring the leadership in, so there is continuity and understanding what it means to be on our board. Because I think
I think a lot of professional too is like, I need my hours, or I need my credential. But what it's really about is like stretching your muscles, or working with weights or something like that. You just need the exposure to different ideas and different perspectives, however you get that done. Maybe it's reading, maybe it's blogs, maybe it's whatever, but it's like, it's not about some designed outcome. It's about exercising your mental muscles so you can adapt to new stuff. I kind of want to shift gears a little bit on this, Paul. Like, you and I have remember the times when many of our CEO friends were, and I'm not exaggerating, effectively note takers for the board. It was a very administrative task. As long as, and the people that got fired because the administration of the enterprise wasn't successful, couldn't find the money, that kind of stuff. Then there was this notion of servant leadership, and this particularly was strong in healthcare, where you and I were working, which is, we are servants of the board, but we have more of a role in directing the organization. And now your own title's an example of this. There's a lot of CEO and president, stuff like that, where the board really has an expectation of you being more directive. Talk to me, what do you think the future of that board CEO relationship is going to look like? You've talked a little bit about how the CEOs and association staff need to look at this with more of a balance. I think board members are looking at their service with more balance. How do you think the board CEO relationship is going to evolve?
I think it's going to be, I see it as being probably, unfortunately, a little more transactional. I think the days of us having deeper relationships is probably not necessarily going to be there. Why do you think that, just on that point? I think that because of the engagement. I have, with having maybe a younger board and people coming in, as people start to retire and we're bringing new people on and they're going to be younger. I think they, as in everything, and we're noticing in our office dynamics, there is less, we're comrades, we're colleagues in the office, but there isn't a whole lot afterwards. I think back in the day, We used to golf. We used to do those things. That time is limited now. More people, want to get into the
Yeah.
board meeting and out, or if they come to the board meeting, they're bringing their spouse and they're going to go do
Yeah.
something. So
Sure.
I see it being a more transactional. Don't get me wrong. I do think there's still building of professional relationships, collegial relationships, but I don't necessarily think the friendships, like
Yeah.
I honestly, there are past board members I consider friends that I think that, and I know there will probably be some going forward, but it's not what it once was.
Yeah. Not as
And
prevalent.
yeah, and that's why I think it could be more transactional. I can see boards. That is though why I do like the ASAE stuff, but I like having board educational things and taking them because I want them to understand the philosophy, and that
Yeah.
while they may think of this as a short time on the board, to me, they're affecting people's lives, they're affecting the future of their organization. I think to understand that and give them that understanding of what they're doing, that they have a short time on here, that they can make impact, but be respectful. To me, it's being respectful of the past as you want to lead towards the future.
Yeah.
So
They want to do a good job. It's
they
like
do.
I can make the case it's our job to put them in a position to succeed and use them in ways that they're useful as
I agree.
opposed to not useful. Like I remember sitting with one of our clients and the staff person sat there while a bunch of members talked about membership models and pricing. And I finally told them like, I have forgotten more about this stuff than you guys know. Like, why don't we use you where you can help me? Because I have never been a dentist.
Yeah.
And I need you to tell me what the market thinks of these sorts of things. How would you use it? What would you use? Like, that's what I need out of you. That's a role you can fulfill. I don't need you to talk to me about pricing and research techniques. So I think oftentimes we put our board members in positions where it's hard for them to succeed because they're great at their company, and we drop them into this different leadership environment and say, now be successful again. So they act like however they act at home, basically.
Right. And that's where I think having board education, again, professional development as a board member is key, because you're right. You have to put on a different hat, a different mentality. I think you bring to the board all those things that make you successful as an individual and job, but you're right. But then you've got to shift your own mindset into how does that play? How do you play well with others? I mean, that's the thing. And, when some CEOs in some industries, the reason they're CEOs in those industries, especially I can say this probably in the fuel industry, the trucking industry, those guys are cutthroat.
Yeah.
And then they get into a board, and here's an interesting, they're on this board, and when they leave the board, they're trying to gut half the other board members, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some of those industries. But they're trying to come together for the better of the industry. And I think, so to me, the way you do that is, again, having the board understand what the goal is, how how the board functions, hopefully the culture of the board. I mean, that's one thing we've really tried to do is one of the things we've done, while I think the CEO transition can be somewhat transactional, I make a very intentional point of bringing my board members together more than once, but always before each board meeting, because I figure it's so much easier when you've broken bread the night before with a board member. You go into that meeting going, okay, Dean's got the same issues or things I have, someone's got kids.
Your kids are the same age, whatever it is.
Yeah. Right. And so I think, then you're not questioning, you can have, to me, then you're not questioning someone's intent because you've had that personal relationship. You can question, I come at that a whole different way, but it becomes less personal and it's more about the decisions. And I think that has really helped our board, because then they know the people around the board I generally have, I think, good board members. I think we'd say that because people who serve on boards are generally, I think they're people who are, to your point, servant leaders. They're trying to give. So to me, when they're doing that, it is so understand why the other person on the board is serving, have that relationship. And then I think it takes some of the, it takes politics out. Hopefully takes politics out. But again, you question less someone's intent and more, okay, where are they coming from? Let me try to understand where someone's coming from rather than assume.
Yeah. So it's kind of a big open-ended question. We've talked about leadership. We've talked about the changing CEO and board role. We've talked about, kind of how you prepare yourself on the board to be successful. when you consider kind of, the evolution of member and other stakeholder needs over the years, kind of looking forward, how do you envision the role of an association executive and association leader changing so that they can continue kind of ensure relevance and value and growth?
I that one is hard. I think I'm seeing it now. I think as a CEO, we're going to have to open ourselves up, even as more so than I said earlier, to really change. I think strategic plans that look, beyond 3 years are kind of ridiculous. I mean, I just, no offense to the consultant who does that, but we are changing at such a fast pace right now with AI. I think association work, especially with AI, is going to get even more interesting. AI is going to be able to do things for us that we would spend countless hours on.
Oh yeah,
it'll be able to dissect research and do some things.
All the transactional stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it'll make some of that so bad. We still have to be involved because we're going to still have to analyze that data, figure out how to put it in place. But it's going to allow us, I think, to move in more dynamic ways. So I think the CEO of the future is really going to, again, kind of to be maybe to your point of the athlete, they're going to have to be nimble. I think they're going to have to be, when you think of biking or swimmers, you've got long distance and then you got the short distance sprinters. And whether the sprinters, fast twitch muscles, so I think maybe where in the past we have been maybe the long with the short, with the distance, with some twitch. I think, speaking metaphorically, I think as an athlete, I think CEOs are going to have to be much quicker. Like associations are going to have to move quicker to address. And I think the CEO is going to have to be able to do that. And maybe, in some ways be a risk taker even more so than we have been, which is going to change. It changes the dynamic between the board and the CEO, but also the CEO and the staff. So you're going to have a staff that's also, I think, willing to take risks and, and be willing to follow, the CEO. But I think you're going to definitely have to make data-driven decisions. And I think, I think this guy's going to help that.
This is kind of a follow-up on that a little bit. And one of the people we interviewed is Joel Abizo, runs the American Planning Association. And he and I got in a conversation about how, as a CEO, and I'll just equate it to your job, Paul, it's like there's a role for your job where you travel the world and represent the profession of actually, I would argue the industry of water. And so you have an external stakeholder role, a spokesperson role, and your previous job as lobbyists, mine too, similar job. You've got your board and your volunteer leaders. That's another group of people that you interact differently with. You're simultaneously a peer and a boss in some respects. And you've got your own staff where you're simultaneously a colleague and a boss. And what Joel was talking about, how a good CEO has to understand which circle you're interacting with and how your leadership style has to adapt to it. So one more point on this, and I'm curious your take on this, which is I think a lot of CEO training, I about said leadership training was my hesitation. It's about functional tasks. I'm going to pick up finance. I'm going to pick up membership. I'm going to pick up meetings. I'm going to pick up regulatory affairs, stuff like that. The tasks, to your point on AI, are a lot easier to solve than the Venn diagram of these different leadership environments. And I wonder whether my traditional path as a CEO no longer prepares me. Because again, both of us know people who they managed to be at their CEO job about 3 months before they got fired. But in their head, they were prepared. They were a director and then a VP and a senior VP. They'd had all the jobs, and but they were unprepared for the role of CEO.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on whether or not our profession is actually training people to be effective CEOs, given the world you've described?
Well, that's actually a very interesting take. I would say that you're right. My point on that.
We will be ending the interview.
I know we'll be ending this. I knew the minute that came out, I knew it was going to get. For those of you who know Dean, I regretted that the minute I said that.
Classic mistake, Paul.
Yep, classic. Set it up, boom, hit it out of the park. When you think about it, when you think about the CAE exam and those things, in the beginning, it was about Did you know your, you know, there'll be questions about your finances and all
Yeah,
those things,
FASB or something like that. Yeah.
yeah, and HR, and if you've got 50
Yeah.
employees and all this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was very, to your point, it was very tasked. I do think and now as a member of the certification commission, actually, I do think as we're looking at new questions and new things, it is more about interaction, understanding transparency. I think you're right. I think the Venn diagram of an association CEO is probably more complicated than almost any other
I'd agree with that.
because it's so relational.
I
So
would
I
agree with
think
that.
I tell my team, I have 3 kids soon in college. I have 2 already and 1 going. I mean, I tell my kids all the time, learn, but what I want you to learn most of is building relationships,
Yeah.
understanding people. To me, that is going to be the future. You're going to have to be, I think, understanding of different people. There's a whole lot of talk and respectfully of DEI. To me, it's less about DEI and it's just about humans. I mean,
Yeah, I agree.
don't get me wrong. I know we need to function on that, but I truly believe it is going to be understanding human relationships. It is going to be understanding, especially in an age where we are so defined by our cell phones and our social media and those things. I see the emotional quotient of this becoming big, but also just how do you navigate from one situation to another without burning bridges, but also without losing who you are, and
Yeah.
staying true to who you are in all of those things. Because sometimes, being a spokesperson means you kind of have to go out, maybe outside. Maybe you're an introvert, but
Yeah.
you got to go out and speak.
Yeah.
So
You
I
got to go
think
speak. Yeah.
you got to speak.
You're an
And
extrovert.
so,
You got to sit at your damn desk and write the report. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And as someone who doesn't like doing that, I have to force. It's something I have to learn. So I think,
No, I still haven't learned it. So.
yeah. So I think, to your point, I think there will be new traits. I do think people are going to have to be more relational, and yet I say that, and yet in my earlier thing I said relational, but understanding that it's going to be transactional too, because I think people
Yeah.
are going to get in, get out, but it's understanding that, and it's building trust quickly with people. And the way I see doing that, though, is by always being very transparent. I think CEOs in the past also could probably hold things close to the vest or work. I think they have to truly, I think you kind of almost have to be an open book with
Yeah.
everyone. And sometimes that's hard because that also means when you take a risk, it's going to be out there. Maybe you want to take the risk and then be able to couch the risk if it fails, but now you're taking risks and it's for everyone to see, and good or bad. So I think
So,
being transparent.
yeah, my phrase is transparency and objectivity are your friends, in many respects.
What do you mean by objectivity?
Objectivity means you want to know 27% of your members think a thing instead of I think they think a thing. The old phrase is he said. Yeah,
So
you've
once
heard me
again,
say.
go back to the data driven.
Like it's okay that people are arguing with each other. You just want them arguing about the same thing. And so, like a lot of times they're not. And again, you and I have worked on. You've heard me navigate that with your own group. And so, that kind of last open-ended question to you, Paul. I was going to make it a really hard one. I'll make it an easy one. I drop you off. 10, 15 years in the future. What advice do you have for our profession? What would you look back and say, I wish all of you would have done this?
I wish all of you had done this, or what do you think I'll see? I don't know. Hopefully what I'm seeing 10 to 15 years from now, I think are what I would consider probably this young cachet of probably young CEOs, because the group I'm with will, hopefully be about 5 to 7 years in retirement, and I don't, hopefully, let me share what I hope I see. What I hope I see are, I think, a cadre of kind of new CEOs who are embracing the technology of the day. Probably AI by that time will be it's so much more advanced than it was a year ago. Imagine what it's going to be 10 years from now. But I think I would hope that they still have that membership component, as you know, that they understand the membership, that they're still making truly data-driven decisions, but not forgetting the relations in that. Because to me, that is what has always been so great about the association world, is the relationships. Trust me, while I miss some of that. I mean, the good old days were just that they were fun. Don't get me wrong. There were some things we probably shouldn't have been doing, some things we should be doing, but the relationships we built were really important. And I think they've gotten to this point. And I hope that our future CEOs and colleagues still can still have the conversations we have, and have this, because our relationship that started 32 years ago has been, would we have seen ourselves here? No, but here we are. We've both benefited. We've both been able to push each other. We've been able to support each other. We've been there good times and bad times. And I mean, you've actually been, I watched you grow in your career and building your company, which has been so awesome. But then to be able to utilize you with with the company that I run was such, I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but that was a great experience for me. I mean, I got to watch you and your element, and that was so cool. And again, but that was supporting, and you were supportive of me in my role, and I was utilizing you and what I knew you could do. And so I hope our future CEOs realize that, man, they need people outside of this office, this realm, to help, push them, because it is, as they say, it's lonely at the top, and you need, I think only other CEOs can really understand and help mentor you and help you grow. Don't get me wrong, you can learn from this, but I think, again, I've learned more in our relationship, Dean, because of it, give and take, than, probably any conference, because of what we share. So I
think a summary, a little bit on that, Paul, is, when I think back to some of your earlier comments too, is I think there's right now a cadre of CEOs working really hard to get their next credential. There's a lot of people I know with grad degrees, a lot of people with certifications, and that takes time, money, and energy. And I can almost make the case, your extra credential isn't what's going to save your job. Or make you successful, your CEO. What is maybe allocating less time on your next credential to getting to know your board and your upcoming leaders more effectively. That is a time management issue, and you're spending too much time taking tests. I hate to simplify it like that, because I know that's not true. But your doctorate in organizational management isn't going to help you keep your job. And so I wonder if but it's easy. And I'm not underestimating the academics of it, but it's harder to get on a plane and sit in, some dude's office in Southern Nevada and talk to him about his family. And that's harder and costs money, but that's the sort of thing that helps you keep your pulse on what your members really want and need and how you can help them.
I agree. We've actually shifted from doing our certification. We do these pinning ceremonies, and we've actually shifted from doing them national conferences to doing them locally. And it has totally changed not only the culture of the ceremony in the sense of, but it's brought it back. We were just in DC and did this with 8 individuals, 8 water operators in DC, water wastewater operators, and it was great to see them with their families,
their friends,
their bosses,
communities there.
Right. And to your point, though, it's the relationship. It's like every year when the annual conference, it is a reminder of why we do our jobs, and it's important. With I think, to your point, you can't do that once or twice a year. I think you have to embrace it more often, because I think with the changing times, with things changing so fast, waiting once or twice a year, you're going to be behind. You're going to be behind. I think, to your point, getting out there, which is unfortunately, we're on the road a lot, but it does mean I am more in touch. It means I bring more ideas back, and I have a better finger on the pulse of what's happening. And I think you're exactly right. I think if our CEOs can do that, don't get me wrong, I believe credentials are important. I think, but do you need more letters behind your name than that are in your name? No.
Yeah, as someone with virtually none behind his name, I also dismiss them. But that's
so
last thing I need is a an old boss of both of ours once told me, Eldon, he goes like, the last thing I need is to take a test and find out how little I know. So,
Eldon, Eldon, who used to, I always share a
I
last
remember
story.
being recorded. We can't. He's retired now. We have to be nice to Eldon. He's retired. So
where is he now?
we'll talk to him when I stop the recording. Hey, everybody, I just want to thank Paul. Yeah. So he and I have to get back and talk about personal stuff. I'm not allowed to post on public anymore. And you know already I can cuss because it's my own company. Hey Paul, I just want to thank you. I had a phenomenal friendship with you over the last multiple decades, and it's been fun growing with you and beside you professionally. And great comments. You're a phenomenal example to anybody who wants to move through our profession successfully. Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And everybody who's happily reading, put your glass of wine, your cocktail down, and feel free to click on some of the other interviews. They're all good. And looking forward to continuing throughout the year to celebrate Association Laboratories' 25th anniversary. With that, I'll sign everybody off and chat with Paul a little bit more. Take care, everybody.
Congrats, everyone.